presentation. Let me first introduce to you our speaker for this track, Mr. Frank Yuan Fan. Mr. Frank Yuan Fan is President and CTO of DB App Security Incorporated. He is a frequent speaker in many security conferences, including US Black Hat and DEF CON. His specialty spans from network layer to application database layer security and compliance. He has been involved in this area for the last 10 years and possesses hands-on ethical hacking experience with different web application and databases. He holds Master of Science degree in computer engineering from the San Jose State University, and today he'll be presenting to us a paper on advanced web application and database threat analysis with MatriXay. So ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Mr. Frank Yuan Fan.
Thank you. So, thank you everyone. I think we'll do a little bit of hurry up since time lapsed a little bit. So, already let me introduce. So right now we have basically the development center in the US and also have one in China. Today we will go through a few topics, including the web application threats, and also especially some of the secret injection and the cross-site scripting analysis, and also look through a few evasion techniques, some Oracle-specific attacks, and also we'll look at the MatriXay in the end for the demo. So, as you probably know, right now the top one attack vector is not the bubble overflow anymore. From the ISA this year, the data has been changed to the web application attack, and the number one in the statistics is the cross-site scripting, and then the secret injection. But probably from the disaster-wide, secret injection should be the number one, and the cross-site scripting should be the number two. Here is the major data on the top 10. I won't go through them one by one. So one thing I would try to point out again is that the network firewall and all the IDS is probably do nothing help in this attack vector. Later on we will come through in this part, and the loss is much more than what you can imagine. Because the reason is very simple, because all your firewall is open, probably AD, 443, DNS, all these traffics, and all these attack we mentioned above is just going through this tunnel, just as exactly legitimate traffic. So there's nothing can stop here, and the problem for IDS and IPS is that they cannot really do the deep analysis, especially that even though they can do the signature-based analysis will not really work very well in this case. So before we come to more details, let's look at one example. Here's one of the cross-site scripting in one of the bank. And you can see that you can easily embed a form inside this bank, the web page, which you can easily lead to all the phishing attack and other attack, whatever you can imagine. So this is just the one example, but today I want to go through the very basic stuff for the like what is cross-site scripting and what is secret injection. I would expecting people here would know this part, but if you don't, just raise your hand and we can talk a little bit more. So and for a secret injection part, I mean probably everyone here has already heard these words so many times, but from the last probably 8 months when we do the penetration testing and a few defending and processing for many enterprise, we found that the trend is obviously for this year is the SQL injection plus ANI and the rootkit in this part. And the funny thing is that yesterday I read one of the news that there was a statistic saying that in all the world, among those hosted hosts, the host that has been attacked and become the chicken host, among all these hosts, China has been hosted number one. So this is really a shame, but of course, this also gives a very obvious sign that this issues has been becoming more and more serious. Of course, U.S., Russia, and Europe has been the second to the third and the fourth. So the general technical of the SQL injection, which pretty much you can inject the things to the parameters that leads the application to do the behavior that you were expecting. There are different types, of course, char-based, num-based, union, search, arrow-based. I have to point out that there's many variations of this attack that I cannot really do the iteration here. But of course, if you're interested, we can discuss afterwards. There are so many evasion and so many deviation of the SQL injection and cross-site scripting that really makes many simple protection software is also useless. So later on we will cover that as well. Specific database, there's many different types of database that you probably use in your DMZ or corporate network, like Oracle, SQL Server, probably among the most popular, MySQL, DB2, Access, Sybase. Sybase is kind of close to SQL Server as well, and Informax. So the evasion part, historical network layer evasion still apply, but not so much. IP fragmentation and TCP segmentation, I won't cover this very much, but really the application layer challenge will be much more in this case. So for example, you can do simple evasion, try to evade some of the simple signature-based detection. Also, you can have using the function to avoid the obvious like constant equals to constant, this kind of attack. And then you also can do the comments insertion in this case to kind of to avoid the string manipulation, and also you can do many of the encoding. And also one thing I want to point out is that some of the encoding that you can combine together, which leads to much more difficult for the detection wide to defense. One thing is always true is that attack always is relatively easier than the defend part. This is pretty much always true, because attack you only need to find one hole, while defend you need to be 100% sure. So this is not really a very fair game in this case, but this is just the fact afterwards. So we have, for example, we have tried many cases. We have during our penetration testing, we have found that some of the websites using some kind of piece of software that will do the filtering that probably people here are known of. So this kind of software will filter out, try to filter out, for example, the single quote or some of the special characters. But this kind of filtering, it's really hard to do it perfectly, because, like I said, different encoding techniques and also combined with the comment insertion will easily can lead to the evasion in backend. For example, just with the single quote, you can use in a different encoding and a combination of encoding. And sometimes you can using the other things instead of a single quote to do the same effect. So it's really hard, again, it's really hard to defend it in the full dimension. So there's also many vendor-specific application attack and defense that we need to be aware of. For example, as we just talked, Oracle specific, there's many vectors like client injection, rootkits, vulnerable procedures, API, and privilege escalation, BS mode, of course, many of secret injection, cross-site scripting, and many of its own application or application server related and the component related vulnerabilities. Oracle also has many secret locations that will lead to many of the interests, like the user dollar, link dollar, all these things that has sensitive information that from a secret injection point of view that you want to try to gain, of course, in the first place. So multi-PO SQL is also another thing. This is not so new things for Oracle, but still many of the applications right now also try to make use of multi-PO SQL. So if it's a vulnerable version, then you pretty much can do everything that you want to do, especially like you create tables and inject the users, of course, updating the data. So many WebDB, Portal, and HTML-DB, e-business suite, you also try to using this part. So in this, you can pretty much have the simple overview of how this basic architecture will work. So it has the Apache in front and the multi-PO SQL, and then through the TNS listener to the backend database. So there's many bypass technology that is you can do to try to evade the simple detection of the multi-PO SQL attacks. For example, using the again encoding, Unicode, using the different kind of same meaning but different presentation for the end of words. So this is another example that gives just simply by the string comparison is really hard in this case for the defense. Another thing I will try to point out is that our research team also found out the ASP.NET has also some specific attacks that will lead to the path disclosure. So you probably know that the Microsoft MS-06033 has claimed to fix the bug for the ASP.NET 2.0, the path leaking mechanism. But we have found that even though it claimed to not affect .NET 1.1, we have found that with the certain manipulation that ASP.NET 1.1 is also very much vulnerable to the path leaking attack. And I don't believe this bug is fixed yet from what our up to now, what our observation is. So ASP.NET and the JSP probably is right now the most popular technology in the web, is being used on the website. And later on, we will also cover some of the general attacks as well. Another thing we kind of experienced in early this year is that we found the vulnerability, secret injection vulnerability in the VTIG CRM system, and the vendor was getting notified immediately, and the CERT also get notified. But there seems to be just a quite accepted. Accepted quietly. This vulnerability is actually we're using the matrix to find out that data we will cover, and in fact, I can probably show you a little bit. So, in fact, I sent email after in the lab we kind of confirmed this vulnerability. So we can easily do the secret injection to get what type of secret injection it is, what is the backend database, and what is the database name, and what is the MySQL user. Because by default, the database using MySQL, the CRM system, vTiger. And pretty much through this point, you can, of course, gain the content stealing. Think about it, what is the most valuable assets, right, for this part, or for the corporation. For the CRM system, of course, the backend, the customer information, right, is the most valuable in this case. So actually, we pretty clear point out the weak point, even with the parameters, but the reaction was really slow till the next release, which is almost, I don't know, 4 or 5 months after. So this is another example that the challenges we have, because it seems it's simple to fix while it's not. And also the fixed time range, from what I can see, is much, much longer than that the finding time. And of course, to find the real weak point is, of course, the first key point here, I think. So this is the information we just kind of captured. So you can see that it's the MySQL and the number type secret injection, and the database name and the username that you can do the secret injection to gain. So one point here is that vTiger is quite popular CRM system as well. So, and many enterprise was using. So this kind of information, these really are a big hole of its backend variable data. So there's many other examples, really, on the when we doing the pen testing and the analysis. For example, we found that a kind of a popular site that is SQL injection with the SQL Server in backend. Everybody probably knows that it's probably one of the dangerous point here, right? This combination, SQL injection and SQL Server. But one of the fix, besides the application code part, as you will imagine, is that they remove the command shell, right? But you probably won't aware that the command shell can actually put it back, even with the SQL injection. So many of the people just simply remove the command shell and try to, think it's safe, because command shell will let you to do all the OS command interaction with the OS, right? But if you just simply remove it, it just doesn't work. You can simply put it back and then you do the command shell again. And after the hack done, he can also remove the command shell for you, right? This procedure. So anyway, this is one of the popular thing. I'm sorry. Okay. So this is one of the popular case that we also met in this case. We will cover the harden and the defense techniques later on. But basically, there's no one shot. Really like, oh, I just removed the command shell, now I feel much safer. There's no such thing in this case. we found that this site has been attacked, and as I said, since the April this year, probably many of people here knows, it's quite popular for the ANI attack because it's much more efficient to broadcast this way instead of sending some junk email and hope that people will, accept your email and click your attachment. Because many of the websites is just very legitimate, very popular websites, right? As long as you can put your rootkit in, or actually, to be more accurately, is your malicious code in, which is not so malicious because it's just a piece of JavaScript software, right? And the real malicious thing, the source is not here. Well, it's several levels away. So look here. I'm pretty sure you can read this JavaScript very clearly, right? So this is pretty much kind of it try to be a little bit hidden and cover itself. But now if we go to the real JPEG that is pointing, look here. This is the real evil thing that is hidden in this fake JPEG. So this is the real thing that you will download and execute automatically, and making use of the famous, of course, ANI remote code execution vulnerability. And the funny thing is that we have found later on many of the antivirus was able to detect some basic this kind of rootkit. However, the malformed and the evasion is doing more and more. For example, later on we found that there was a funny site called 591ani.cn. This site is pretty, crazy. So it pretty much gained all the possible malicious code and then all the evasions inside this. And at that moment when we found pretty much no antivirus will alert when it put all these rootkit on your computers. So, and also because this is pretty much the factory of the whole different kinds of rootkit and control the trojans and the virus. Basically, when later on we found that when a computer gets attacked, the host file also gets changed. And then, for example, if you visit Google, it's actually not Google. You directly gain from there and automatically from iframe through iframe automatically to put the rootkit back on your computer. Also, it does something funny, which is that it already has a list of antivirus and the security software company that it will all direct to these sites. So basically all the updates will not work. All the auto updates will not work. It also modifies many of the registries. We can take a look through a few things. So it will also modify some of the registry to protect itself as well. So, and doing many of the self-hidden and try to evade the antivirus the detections. So look here, many of the sites that you will try to do for the host file. Anyway, the point here is that it's really it's always kind of the game is going pretty interesting here, because before that we've never seen any site will have something that the latest antivirus will not detect. So coming through the detection tips and the strategy, first of all, the big challenge is that, if you try to detect everything, you lose the performance and then you have the false positives. A detection technique-wide, combined technique and will have two use. For example, signature-based and anomaly detection together. So in the next step, I'm going to put a little bit time on the MatriXay, which is automated web application scanner, which will scan all these major vulnerabilities automatically. So basically, it has the deep crawl, has the pen testing and audit capability, and it has the proved results with very, very low false alarm. So, for example, the direct scan and the proxy, both mode supporting intelligent engine, SSL support, cross-site scripting, and many other things. So one of the most important thing here is that the accuracy, because many of the scanners, as you probably know, is the false alarm problem, right? Because it gives you 200 pages of report, and you found actually there's only maybe 2 pages are real. You really get a headache of, get crazy of what is real vulnerability here, right? So especially for the secret injection and the cross-site scripting part. So before I continue, I would like to show a simple demo of how does this work. So this is a movie rental system. Okay, just simply put in. You can scan the whole domain, or you can just scan the UI only. So once it detects, for example, injection cross-site scripting. So for injection, it will try to get the database type and what is in backend through the secret injection automatically. For example, what's the database name, what's the username, and what's the secret injection type. Is it char type, num type, search type, union, or whatever. Now, it will try to get how many tables is in backend. So once you get how many tables, then of course your next step is try to get a few tables that you're interested in, right? So for the purpose wide, we get just one table, and then you will try to get how many columns is in this table. And okay, now you get 3 columns, and now you get all the column name of the table. Up till now, you have probably realized that this approach already has proved the results of the secret injection, that you can easily identify which the weak point is, and you can, with the 100% of confidence, tell your boss or tell your team under you that this is a real vulnerable point, that we should do it with the highest priority. And now, of course, once you get a table, you can also try to gain the content from this table. So you can pretty much get any of the content of this table, whatever you like. So you have the choice when you get the columns. So and these are pretty much just a legitimate kind of simple, but it's a real effective way, quick but effective way to prove the results. So there's many more scan functionality, but then I would like to come through the audit and the pen testing part. So now you have the audit, and for the funny thing is that when it detects what is a backend database, it automatically loads different kind of audit and pen testing vector, because different database really has different vectors and the things that you need to audit. For example, the configuration, the weak passwords, what are the parameters that it's using, what are the users and the passwords, what are the privileges, and what is the version, for example, in backend. This is probably the first thing that we will be interested, right? Because, of course, the SQL Server 2000 and 2005 will be different. 9i, Oracle 9i, and the 10G will be different, right? So this is now we get see if we're using default passwords, if it is how many privileges does it has, what's the SQL area, what's the version in the backend. This is probably the most first thing that you want to audit through this SQL injection, through this web layer. So, because later we will cover, even for the defense point of view, the best way is also defend the web application layer and the database layer. So in this sense, when you try to pen test and audit, when you do both two layers, it's also the best breed of bridge. So now see it also you can try some of the pen testing like escalation privilege and even get the backend server name. So for the SQL Server, that will be different. For example, the pen testing will be execute OS command, or you do something even for the much more like web shell things, and those many of the network functionality. So now we come back with the whole only purpose really is try to show that how quick right now that just one vulnerability like SQL injection that people can gain and make use of it to do the big disaster of the websites. And the MatriXay really has the cross database support and HTTPS support and the directed scan and proxy mode. Proxy mode is also very important, especially for some of the applications has many post forms things that you want to check in the reality, because there's many of the applications based on your in-house procedures. So you want to fill in the real data and go through the procedures and let the MatriXay do all the scanning and the vulnerability assessment in backend for you. So in that case, for example, one of our customer users use it in the in-house. It's a very huge company, 2 characters, start with H. So they use the in-house to just get, the QA will use it. And the QA will just, browsing and, doing all the functional testing. But then the backend, the scanning and all these vulnerability assessment is going on. So there's a couple of highlights, the cross-database support, both directly scan and proxy mode, high performance, flexible pen testing framework, because you can add your framework in without changing the software, very low false alarm, and fully automated. So this is one of the graphs I liked to use before. That again, here is the firewall, right? And here has the open door, of course, for all the HTTP and HTTPS traffic, and the web server. And now through this web server, you can gain all these database attack, sensitive application data, privilege, roles, authentication, data dictionary, OS file access, buffer overflow, and even denial of service. By the way, we did find the trend that the application layer denial of service is also coming up. I don't know if people here has a lot of concern on this part, but it's obviously after the originally, all these network layer, SIM flooding or UDP, wide all these DDoS, the application layer denial of service has many advantages as well, because it just, from a simple wide, it just use out all your connections, and in many of the cases, the application could even almost die, and including the backend database in this part. So, and also because it looks legitimate, this kind of defense is also will be a challenge as well. So, perimeter defense usually do little help, right? We already mentioned. So database is different, but there are things in common. So that leads to different kinds of secret injection, which is possible. Database has to maintain a lot of information, like many of the sensitive information, even inside the database or even in memory, that to keep it all working well, right? The more complex the database is, the more sensitive information that it has to maintain, the more data has to maintain. Harden a database is not so easy. So here's one of the pen testing sequence that we use. For example, we detect whether it's secret injectable. We will try to detect what is the real backend database type, and what is the database name and username that is used. What are the privileges? What is the backend data dictionary? And then you can do the advanced injection and the auditing through this point. There's many things in common about the database. For example, the versions, like VDOT version, Oracle LL version in SQL Server, and in DB2. So, because all the different databases, they all based on the basic database theory, right? Which we know that, for example, the data that manages the data, like all the metadata theory, all these default use and passwords, all these configuration, default configuration, and all these privilege-wide roles, this concept, right? Triggers. So this kind of concept, this kind of content and concept will also can be used during your pen testing purpose, because if one feature you can use it in the bright part, and also you can use it in the dark part. That's also one of the things, tick and tack, which is interesting thing always in the security world, right? So password management, right? Stop procedures, ports, evil procedure and functions. I mean, not so evil, but it's a different kind of function that pretty much like a network function, or the OS file function, and the OS interactions, the things between the Oracle SQL Server and the DB2. So also student 9i and 10G and even the latest 11G, there's many of the fix plus fix among all the through, but there's always when a new version come up, the new vulnerabilities came as well. 10G did a relatively good job, like for the listener part, for its own management part, and for the quick, later on the CPU release. But still, there's a lot of left, actually, even with the latest version. 10G and 9 are using the same password algorithm, which is a weak malformed DES encryption without sort. In 11G, it changed this behavior a little bit, but there will be new, with this totally new version, there will be new vulnerabilities that you didn't see in 9i and 10G before. 2000 and 2005, I don't know how much people is using here. 2005 I think did some progress in the security part, especially on the default configuration. Doesn't enable a lot of network service, and also with the more granularity, the ACL controls. But from our pen testing, there's really not so much difficulty between these two. So it's only, a little bit progress from the security-wide. 2000, of course, that's pretty much a disaster. Even before, right? Everybody knows many of the default configurations, default package, which every hacker loves, right? So, of course, game upgrade to 2005 is the preferred choice, even though that the security-wide, the improvement is relatively really low. This is one of the reports that we just mentioned of Magic. It mentions, which URL, what's the backend database, username, password, username and the database name, what's the table content. So all these you gain from remotely, just like a black box hacker testing does, right? And testing does. And also it has the scripted cross-site scripting. So, well, in short, it's really, I don't think I need to read more about this part. And we already saw them because I was thinking to put this ahead is a little bit better, even for the time purpose. So the next revision that we are already doing for a couple of months will be including with all the existing functionality, including Ajax hacking, actually Ajax pen testing, I'm sorry, because right now, as everybody knows, that Ajax is becoming more and more popular, including the big enterprise and the small corporations, home cooked all these applications. So this is one thing is really important. And of course, with a lot of other enhancements in for the next revision. So we'll probably have a preview revision, free release probably in November or December. So defense and audit tips. So application layer hardening is the key, right? It's really the root cause because all these check injection and the cross-site scripting part, this is really the root of the root cause. And never trust the client-side validation because this really doesn't work, right? Everybody knows. Even for the Ajax hacking, it is the same thing. Never trust the client-side, those JavaScript or those validation. So database layer hardening, from privilege-wide, from the more fine-grained the ACL to control what the application layer this user really can do. Many of the time we just grant too much privilege to the application user that it's almost a DBA or it is just a DBA, right? So this is just not right. And also, of course, web firewall and doing the black box testing and do the database layer auditing is also important. So the 3 layers defense, 3-way defense. So a little bit introducing about the DB app security team. So we do the penetration testing and we do all the defense and the black box testing products. The successful rate of pen testing right now is pretty much 90%. So it's pretty much some of the reference I use. And thank you for listening. I'd like to leave a few minutes for questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Frank. If you have any questions from the floor, and again, the best question from the floor will be awarded an antivirus kit courtesy of Panda Security Malaysia. So feel free. Any questions? Or we get to keep the antivirus kit.
If there's no question, then I get it, right?
Okay,
Just
you get to
kidding.
keep it.
Just kidding.
Any questions on the from the floor? If not, that's fine. I'm sure some of you would prefer to approach Mr. Frank directly.
Right. We can talk afterwards, whatever the question you have, or you have some experience or cases. So anyway, thank you very much for listening, and so thank you.
Thank you again. Okay, so now we're actually going to move right away to our next talk by Dr. Stefano. We'll give him a few minutes to actually set up, and we'll start right away after that.